Hello there. So I saw this interview the other day. It was with Dave Rubin and Heather McDonald. Heather McDonald is an atheist. Okay. At the end of interviews, Dave Rubin has been doing this thing where he asks the people he's interviewing to actually say something positive to bring someone light where everyone's going through darkness or whatever it is because of the pandemic or whatever. And Heather McDonald said, "Well, I'm the worst person to ask this because I'm a pessimist." And I was thinking to myself, that makes sense because she's an atheist. And I was thinking, I was an atheist, right? And when I was one, everything was doom and gloom. Everything you can find, people have their ups and people have their downs, right? And we all know this. But when I was an atheist, I primarily was just seeing the people's negatives and judging them and thinking how awful these people are, how horrible. Look at those people. There was so much hate within me as an atheist, and as I'm becoming happier with my life, I'm seeing more good. I'm seeing more value, seeing more purpose. I'm finding myself making sense of this idea that there is a God. And I'm thinking there's a direct connection between people's lives, people being hurt in their lives, and actually going to leaning more to not believing there's a God because everything is like, how can a God? This question asked as old as time. How can a God have this all these horrible things happen to us people, or whatever it is, something to that effect? And obviously, like, you think, like, if there's a God, he's gonna love us, he's gonna care for us like a parent or whatever it is. There's things of this idea of God that we just don't understand, but we'd like to think we do, or whatever it is. A lot of people, they try to understand God thinking they can, and ultimately I don't think we can. I think if there is a God, there's no way to understand this being. You can't even understand the existence of the being, let alone understand anything about the being. We all know we're not perfect. The idea we can understand a perfect being who understands everything is actually absurd. But anyhow, people go through their misery and their depression and they reject this idea that there is a God or anything hopeful, anything to be positive, anything good, and they try to latch onto things that make them feel good, and they become very, very selfish. When you're hurting, when you're going through a lot of pain, you become a more selfish being. I know this from my own experiences. My upbringing wasn't exactly the happiest upbringing, and I found as I was getting older, I was rejecting religious ideals more and just serving myself. I became, whether I believed in God or not, I became this idea of secular work. I just believed in worshiping myself and worshiping others, worshiping musicians and other things that I can latch onto and just worship. I mean, I loved listening to music. You wouldn't find me without my music for many years. That was just my life and my worship. And I wasn't exactly being religious or doing anything religious based, even though whether or not I believe in God wasn't even relevant. I was living a secular life, worshiping people, worshiping man, worshiping whatever it is, not worshiping God. That's what it came down to. As I'm becoming more joyful in my life, accepting that there's a purpose and humbling myself to this idea that there is a God, I'm becoming more happy and I'm seeing more purpose and I'm able to see positive in things. And it's endless. The amount of good you can learn, the amount of good that there is, and the amount of things you can appreciate that there is endless. But it's harder to do when you're hurting. It's harder to actually see that there's good going on in the world, that there's positive things, that there's actually things that make sense. There's actually a purpose to things. You can find it within your own life, perhaps. I found that the closer I'm getting to God, I'm finding myself actually finding this purpose that exists. That's from me. That I am made with a purpose. That I find that I went through things I went through that was miserable. And if you were to take a time machine right now and go back in the past in my history, you would probably say, stop everything you're doing to that child looking at me. And I would right now actually go with you and stop you. I would say, don't do that. I'm not going to get into the details of that, but you can actually find there's purpose and there's reason for things, and even misery and all that. You can't see hindsight. You can see hindsight to 2020, but you can't see when you're actually in the hindsight. You can't actually see when you're there why it's good, why it's beneficial, why you're going through what you're going through. I have found that I have become a more insightful person. I have worked through issues that a lot of people I know struggle through. I've been able to grow to such heights that I never even could have imagined. I've experienced joy and happiness that I didn't even know was possible through so many years of depression and misery. And I have found that while that is happening, I'm seeing a purpose and making sense of things to happen for a reason and exist for a reason, that things are good. And it is good for a reason. And ultimately, if there is no God, there is no purpose or reason for good or anything. In fact, there is no such thing as good or bad if there is no God. If there is a God, then there's good things and there's bad things. There's sins and there's good deeds. But without God, everything is just subjective. Everything's just what you want it to be. If I say something is good, it's just that just really means I like it. It just means it makes me feel good. It doesn't mean it matters. Why does anything matter if there's no God? So I think there's actually something there's something directly connected to this idea that Heather McDonald, who's an atheist, would say, I am a pessimist and I see no hope for anything in the future and everything's just doom and gloom, where the guy who was interviewing, who was an atheist, Dave Rubin, is optimistic and he sees the good, and he is also someone getting closer to God and seeing a purpose and seeing that there's something more than just this world that has no purpose and no value and no worth. He was actually somebody who would say, I am an atheist, I don't see it. And then as he's seeing good and actually becoming closer to God, as I have experienced, we're both, it seems, seeing a purpose and seeing the good and seeing the worth of things in life and seeing that there obviously is something. And if we're wrong, I think my view on this now is if we're wrong that there is no God, it is better believing there is and that there is an objective purpose for our lives and living for that than not. Because if there is no God, what is the purpose of any of the stuff that we're trying to do? And if we're wrong, so be it. We lived a life at least being provided with a purpose that was false. Who cares? At the end of the day, you're dead anyways. It didn't matter if you actually believed there wasn't a purpose or not. The fact that you can cause your family, your kids, and generations to come to actually believe they exist for a purpose and lead a happy, successful life in and of itself is worthwhile enough to believe in God, even if there is no God, as far as I'm concerned. And yeah, that's all I got for that. All the best. Thanks for watching.